In a previous video, I used the word progressive in a reenactment context, and I understand that that might cause a little bit of confusion among people who are not already a part of that reenactment community. So I wanted to provide a really quick video just to explain what that actually means. Well, right off the bat, let me just cover that it is not, in fact, a political term. It doesn't relate at all to modern-day American politics. You know, in modern American politics, people often refer to progressives. They will talk to themselves as being a progressive person. They'll refer to progressive politics and progressivism and whatnot as a movement, sort of like a subset of the Democratic Party and what is generally seen as liberalism in America. It's a very strange way to define the word in many ways, I think, but it has nothing to do with any of that. It's not a political meaning in any way. Rather, in a reenactment context, it refers to, so to say, a more authentically minded individual or more authentically minded unit. Something in the reenactment world might be defined as progressive if it is, so to say, as close as we can get to the original back in the day. You know, if rather than painting one's gaiters, they actually use black ball to color them black and make them waterproof. Black ball being the older material, how they would actually give the gaiters that shine back in the days, but it's also a very, messy material. It never sets properly. It's very, sticky. It's just a mess. It's miserable to use, and so a lot of reenactment units won't actually use black ball on their gaiters. They'll just paint them so they only have to do it once, and it'll just stay with those proper properties. To do it the appropriate, the period authentic way would also be considered the progressive way to do that thing, as opposed to maybe the mainstream way of doing it, which is a bit easier. If, for example, when painting belting, if you use something called pipe clay, which is, again, the historical material, you can imagine what pipe clay is made out of, they would use that to whiten their belts. If you use that appropriate material, which again is rather annoying stuff to use because it doesn't set as well, it's always sloughing off, so you have to constantly be reapplying and repainting the belting in order to get that bright white color, that would be the progressive thing to do, as opposed to, again, what's usually referred to, I don't particularly like the way it's referred to as this, but what's referred to as the mainstream way of doing it, which is to say you paint the belts that white color. We might say even that those units which camp out appropriately at the events, rather than going out with a bunch of very large tents, every individual soldier having for themselves a tent that would normally fit like 8 or 9 guys, that would be not very authentic. Those guys who would go out in the field like, oh, well, in this campaign, we didn't have tents because we were in a more desperate situation, so we're sleeping out under the stars tonight. Or, we are using the elements around us, we're going to make a lean-to of some sort using, the sticks and the leaves we find. That would be a very, hardcore progressive thing to do, as opposed to the sort of the easier route, which is to just, put up a tent and sleep in there, or even, as I often do, go and hotel it for the night. That's sort of what it refers to. And the meaning of the word itself, why it's referred to as being progressive as opposed to, more authentic or more accurate or whatever, largely is from the idea that when you, as a reenactment unit, sort of make a new discovery, as you find some new piece of evidence that would change the way you do things, rather than sticking with the old way because it's what you know, because it's easier, because it's cheaper even, anything like that, rather than just sticking with the old way of things, you progress your impression, you advance, you move it along, you progress your impression to that new standard of authenticity. A really great example actually comes from the 54th very recently. Steve Gardner, our leader, our peerless lieutenant colonel, he has his officer's coat. Very recently, he was actually shown by someone who's doing some research in a related field, a little portrait of an officer from the 54th, something that we hadn't had before, something that we didn't know about. We didn't completely know how the officers' coats would have looked, and so he had to look at other regiments, how they did things, and sort of work from there what would look best. Well, we looked at this little portrait of a 54th officer, and on his coat, the buttons were actually paired, not as on a regular soldier's coat, just, straight down the way, they were actually paired in twos, almost like, the 2nd Regiment of Foot Guards type thing. And so rather than Steve just being like, oh, wow, that's neat, that's the more appropriate way to have it, but I already have my coat, so I'm just gonna stick with what I've got because, it's a lot of work to make a whole new coat just because now I found out that there's buttons in pairs on, the same kind of coat that I should be having. I'll just leave it the way it is. Well, rather than do that, he actually went back, he made the alterations to his coat, and he redid all the buttons, all the lacing, and he put them in pairs down the way so they are more authentic, more appropriate. He saw something, a bit of new evidence, a new piece of material culture that we didn't know about before, and he progressed his impression to match that level of authenticity. Another good example might be, for example, as in the earlier video, the pronunciation of huzzah. We all used to say huzzah, but as new evidence comes to light, in fairness, the article was published in 2014, so it's not really new evidence, but still, the evidence came to light for us that, oh, the authentic way to say the word is actually huzzah. And so the 54th has begun that transition of hammering into everyone, we are now going to say it as huzzah, not as huzzah. We progress the impression to a more appropriate standard. That's what the word means. Again, nothing political. Thank you all so very much for watching. I do hope the video was enjoyable. Of course, in particular, I'd like to thank my ever-beneficent supporting classes over on patreon.com. It is indeed thanks to their financial support that it really allows me to continue doing what I do. And, well, of course, to you as well, my dear viewer. I am, and I shall remain, your most humble and obedient of servants.